Hi, I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And I'm Dr. Scott.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each episode, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Welcome Behind the Couch. Today's live stream conversation features author and former California State Assemblyman Mike Gatto. We cover his book, Noir By Necessity, about the unsolved murder of his father here in Los Angeles. Hello, everyone. Thanks for those of you that are joining us already live. We have a really great discussion, conversation show for you today or tonight, whenever you're listening to this. And I would say mark this as kind of a beginning of somewhat of a summer book series for us. At the end, we'll let you know what guests we have coming up, because if you need some stuff to read, we have a wide variety of authors we're going to be talking to. Some you've heard from before that we have worked with previously, and some new ones. So we'll let you know what's coming up at the end of the show today.
Absolutely. And again, this is something that you and I have discussed over the last few weeks is we're getting bombarded with AI generated PR letters trying to get us to interview people that have absolutely no intersection with true crime and forensic psychology, which is it's
been so weird,
which is weird, but it's like such a breath of fresh air today because we literally have absolutely the perfect guest and with the most amazing book. And we'll get into that.
Yes. Scott, did you want to talk about the walking tour?
Yes.
A little
Thank you. We're starting to firm up the dates. Luckily, we got feedback from our dear friend, Chris at LA Walking Tours. There's a lot of open space for scheduling. And so Shiloh and I will be scheduling 2 separate walking tours this summer so that we can hit as many of our fans as possible. Please stay tuned to social media. And remember, Patreon members do get first dibs on the tickets. So this might be a great time to join Patreon if you've been thinking about it. And as other shows do, and I admire them for saying this, you're more than welcome to join Patreon for a month and buy your ticket and then unsubscribe. That would also give you a chance to download a whole bunch of member stuff. If you want to just put $5 in the kitty and then download all the extra stuff, you're more than welcome to do that. We're not going to hold it against you, but we would love to get you guys as many as possible in on these LA walking tours because they are unbelievably well constructed. They're so good. Now, also a new Patreon member shout out. We have one new patron shout out since our last live stream, which was only a couple of weeks ago. So at the associates level, we have Shannon R, and she has joined the Patreon family. So yeah, here you go. I'm going to give you there you go. Get some fireworks. Let's get some special effects for her. Yeah. Woo. We appreciate your support.
Yeah. And Tool Girl, thank you so much for the compliments. I hope I sound okay, you guys. My mic is being weird and I was trying to fix it as Scott was doing some of that housekeeping, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Hope it sounds okay.
And we have our the magic of Jason Osri,
our editor.
He'll fix it. He makes everything better.
What will we do without him? Yeah. So let's get into it because I feel like we're going to run out of time like crazy today. We are going to bring our guest on, as we do when we just like to embarrass and flatter the heck out of our guests by reading bios about them as they sit there awkwardly and
uncomfortably.
We've been on the other side of that. We know what it's like. So we're just kind of like paying it forward, I guess.
Mike, just take it in. Take in all of the accolades. You can do it.
So everyone, today we have Mike Gatto, and in law and in life, he has always felt a calling to improve how society works for its citizens. And that calling led him to serve in the California State Assembly, where he won 8 elections to serve 4 terms. During his tenure in the legislature, Mike served on the Banking and Finance Committee, presided over assembly sessions as assistant speaker, and chaired the Appropriations, Consumer Protection and Privacy, and Utilities and Commerce committees. As chair of Appropriations, he determined billions in spending each year because California. As chair of Consumer Protection and Privacy, he was involved in several innovative initiatives involving technology and cybersecurity. And before his election to Assembly, Mike, or as I think we're just going to call him, the third doctor in the room, Dr. Mike, JD, practiced at Los Angeles' oldest and most distinguished firm and previously served as a congressional chief of staff and in the administrations of 3 LA mayors. Mike has achieved successful outcomes in a number of high-stakes cases before the California Court of Appeals, the California State Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court. Nowadays, he advises Fortune 500 companies and small businesses on how to navigate the halls of power and is a sought-after advisor to investors and analysts on political and regulatory climate forecasting trends that affect publicly traded companies. Mike is also a regular fixture in the media as a commentator on national news networks. Welcome.
It's great to be here. That was indeed quite the wind-up, and I appreciate it.
No problem. How are you doing today? Thanks for being with us on a Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. This is a real treat.
Thank you.
Even though the subject matter is difficult.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
And I didn't realize that, maybe we'd be taking away from our holiday weekend when we all scheduled this, but I'm really glad we made it happen and that we could talk with you about your book. So we're absolutely here to discuss your book, Noir by Necessity. Here's a picture how my father's unsolved murder took me to dark places. You put out into the world last year. But first, you're native to Southern California. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up? Tell us about you a bit.
Sure. So I was born in a neighborhood of Los Angeles that's now called the Franklin Hills. But when I was a child, it was just LA. There was no blue street sign, to denote it or anything like that. And when I was 4, we moved to a community called Silver Lake. And I always say before it was trendy.
Yes.
People, this dates me a little bit, but before the year about 2002, 2003, you could buy a house in Silver Lake for about $150,000, a pretty nice house.
Yeah.
And,
those days are long gone.
Those days are long gone. But my family were early adopters of Silver Lake. We loved it there. And that's where we lived for a very long time. And that was part of the district in which I ran. And that's where my father lived when he was murdered.
Yeah, Scott and I have spent a lot of time in Silver Lake. We've both had friends over the years that have lived there and still home to some of my favorite coffee places that I scoot over from downtown from time to time. So let's jump into this. I mean, we want to take time to learn about your father at the top of the show here. We just found his life to be so remarkable. Tell us a little bit about Joseph.
Well, it's funny because, when the media reports on a high-profile murder, there's always that sentence, right? How do they describe the victim, right? With my dad, they always said, beloved local teacher and father of State Assemblyman Mike Gatto, right? And I'm not complaining, right? I mean, I'm a realist. I know that the media has to describe things in shorthand. But of course, my father was much more than that, right? He, like any other victim, he was a very, very well-rounded, complex, nuanced person. The best way that I would describe him is he was a Renaissance man in the true original sense of that word, meaning that art was his life. Like he loved art, but at the same time, he also loved mechanics and, he could take apart a car engine. He could rewire the electrics in a house with me. He was a guy's guy. He was like, very no nonsense and very much, the guy who gives like tough love to his students and makes them better for it. As he aged, he became sort of that old Italian guy that everybody loves, right? He was the guy who, his peach tree would produce like a bag of peaches every day during the summer and he'd go give them out, right? He was the guy who was always sharing his tomatoes that he grew. He was just that guy that everybody in the neighborhood knew and waved to and said hi to, and who had taught school for 47 years. So had this small army of students who really loved him and really loved what he taught them. That's who was taken from us. He was also a very, very doting grandfather. Look, every loss is painful, but when it's somebody like my dad, it's really, really painful. And there's a lot of people who he left behind who really, really miss him.
Well, I come from a family of educators. My mom, both my sisters, my dad, all had taught at elementary all the way through college. And I really believe that it takes a certain type of person in the world to pursue that career because they care. They care about the community. They care about not just the individual, but how that individual is going to impact, the world at large. And it really sounds like your dad was one of those teachers that people will remember for a very long time. So I appreciate your sharing that with us. I also want to put a pin in something, Mike. Like, look, Shiloh and I are in the production of this type of content, not only because it interests us, but we also have a nexus to tragedy and loss. And I appreciate you being here, but please take care of yourself through this. I mean, I know you wrote a book about it and you've processed it as much as you can, but we're going to both ask you some questions, but you take the lead in the direction that you're most comfortable with, because
Absolutely.
We just appreciate you being with us today.
Likewise. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. And that being said, now I'm going to ask probably one of the harder things. And can you set the scene for us a little bit and tell us about where you were in your life, developmentally, professionally, when you heard of this tragedy? I mean, when that message is delivered to you, which it's incomprehensible for most people to get that kind of a message. Share with us what you're comfortable sharing about that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for asking. So one of the ways that I describe it to people is it's hard to fathom how fast your life can change. And it's hard to fathom how weird it feels. It's like we've all seen those movies where the movie starts and sets a tone and someone's calmly driving home and then like an 18-wheeler T-bones them. That's what I felt like physically and emotionally. I was at the happiest and probably most fulfilled point that I had been in my life up at that point. I had two beautiful daughters. One had just been born the year before. One was a little bit older than that. I was at the pinnacle of my power or my achievement in the legislature at that point. I had just been appointed chair of appropriations, which is the third or fourth most powerful position in the Capitol. I felt like I could finally do the good that I had run for office to do. I had a very happy family life. My dad and me he was so happy and so proud and so happy to have grandkids and everything like that. So I'm up in Sacramento, even though it was November and the legislature's not in session. I had come back to Sacramento for a couple reasons. I had to take an official portrait. My original portrait was taken after a special election, so it wasn't really proper. So the speaker had scheduled another portrait session for me. Then I had some meetings with some farmers from the Central Valley, and they wanted to meet in Sacramento versus Los Angeles. It was closer. So I did all that, and I came home, and my family came with me to Sacramento. So we kept our residence up there. We also kept our residence down here. So I think we had just put the baby to bed, and we were about to put my older daughter to bed too. My phone rings, and it's my younger sister. And she didn't really call like on a Tuesday or Wednesday at like 8 o'clock, so I picked it up. Usually, I'm a private guy, so I usually let a lot of calls go to voicemail, but I picked it up and she was hysterical. And she's like, hey, I went over to dad's house, blah, 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 and I think he's dead. And I'm like, no, get out of here. Like, my dad was so healthy. He was a guy who, I said this in the book, he would deadlift refrigerators. He would sprint upstairs. His family lived until they were very, very old, his relatives. He just was so healthy. So I'm just in disbelief. I'm like, come on, get out of here. And she's like, no, I'm pretty sure his body's cold. Like, that's impossible. I call an ambulance. So my sister calls an ambulance. I don't remember what happened in the next 10 or 20 minutes, but at some point, someone confirmed to me that my dad was dead. And basically over a very, very long and sleepless night, I learned from different police that he appeared to have been shot, that there was a very, very small entry and exit wound or something like that. And also that there were, limited signs of forced entry and limited stuff that was taken. And that was it. That was the first sort of rush of information that I got. And it was surreal.
Yeah. What other word can you use for it? I mean, in those first few moments that you're describing of hearing from your sister, think of the most minuscule, comparatively bad news that we get, we can't even soak in the moment. And just magnifying that all the way through receiving the information and the confirmation. And how old was your father at the time?
He was, so it says 2013, he was about to turn 79. He was 78 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. So
and was he residing alone? So where did your sister find him?
Oh, and I should have been clear about that. My sister found him, or the police and paramedics found him in the top floor. My dad had one of those houses that are sort of built up in Silver Lake. So it was a 3-story house.
Yeah.
And the third floor was the master suite. And they found him slumped at his desk on the third floor of his own house, which was my childhood home. It, was, again, something that was weird. He did live alone. My parents had separated after 20 years of marriage. He was, the irony is, these little decisions, right, that you feel guilty about. We had begged him to get a dog. We had just told him, get a dog. You love dogs. We used to have a dog. Like, they're such good burglar alarms, and he just hadn't,
And companionship would have been nice.
Companionship, right? Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I love how you decided to write this book? And you kind of talk about it at the beginning. What you wanted to do was take the reader on a journey just as you learned how everything unfolded in chronological order. I also love that you don't waste any time, right? I mean, and even within like the first 30 pages, you managed to weave so much into this that is so concise and succinct and makes sense and doesn't feel like filler, where we learn about your job as an assemblyman and get a little taste of what that was like. And I have to say, a very excellent, transparent view of what it's like to be a state lawmaker. Like something I feel like we didn't get in civics class that I was like, oh, this feels real, that someone's telling us what it's really like. We also know fairly quickly the ins and outs that you just told us of what happened to your father. At what point did you know that you wanted to tell this story, write a book, share it in the way that you did, like deciding to write it in this real life timeline? Because as you mentioned, I mean, we're talking nearly over a decade when you decided to write it, but I would love to know a little bit about the process, because I'm sure there was a lot of back and forth with that.
Yeah, it was a tough decision to write the book. I talk about in the book how during various moments I had been approached for certain different types of publicity, but it didn't quite feel right. So at those moments, I tried to sort of eschew the publicity, but at about 8 years in, I started to get this, well, I think I can say it's an unrealistic fantasy, right? I had this thought that if I wrote the book and if I detailed every single possible clue and I made it as interesting as possible so lots of people would buy it and read it, that there'd be some granny in Oklahoma who would step forward and say, I figured it all out, folks. And in retrospect, it sounds so silly because obviously it didn't work. But I had this fantasy that it would keep my dad's case alive, which it did. It kept it in the media, which puts pressure on the police, which they need. But I had this idea that that somebody in Silver Lake or somebody would read it and they would say, you know what? I remember somebody behaving strangely that night, or I saw something, or somebody would just piece together the clues and say, this is who I think did it. That hasn't happened, obviously. I should tell the viewer that my dad's case is still unsolved.
Right.
We're now approaching year 13. But that was one of my goals for writing the book. The other goal was the criminal justice debate is endless. It's endless. And I tried to give it fairness in the book. I tried to talk about the different viewpoints. But there are a lot of victims out there who are not state lawmakers. There's a lot of victims out there who are not on TV. There's a lot of victims who just suffer in silence. And after meeting so many of them at marches and meeting so many of them at victims' rights groups and things like that, I mean, I started to feel like I had this duty to talk about what victims go through. Like, what's it like when you get a phone call saying that your relative was murdered? What's it like? What's it like dealing with police? What's it like, hoping that you get a break? And those are the two reasons I wrote the book. I don't regret it, but I realized my first reason was probably a little silly.
Dr. Shiloh and I have been immersed in this for almost the better part of a decade at this point. And one of the things that I've really come to respect, first of all, that's not a fantasy. I think you did something incredibly brave, because in putting all of these very intimate things out here, as well as your ideas about what the clues could be, the world is very different, even in the last 15 years. And there are some armchair detectives that do unbelievable work.
Yes.
And sometimes that is what's needed, is to light a little bit of kerosene under law enforcement's butts to keep the story alive, to keep the interest alive, and to keep it voiced to a larger part of the population who will also, post on Reddit. For better or worse, there are some amazing things that have come from people who are like, hey, I lived in that area and I happen to know this about that area. All of those little points of information can add up. So thank you for having the courage to do that for yourself. And again, like I was saying earlier, doing it for the community. You're doing it for the community and putting this out there.
Thank you.
Just as a reader, I feel like it's one of the most transparent journeys I've been on with a victim, in terms of just it's literally like we're kind of walking side by side with you. And I think that is so powerful in the way you chose to write it. It's stylistically different, but it works in a way that I think it's to the goals that you were just talking about. So, I mean, if that was part of your main goal at the beginning, you certainly followed through and accomplished probably much more than, you're talking about like kind of the fantasy part of it, which I also understand, why you use that word, but there's a lot there for sure that turned out the way I think you envisioned, at least as a reader, right? Because it's hard to hear that.
Had you written before? I mean, how did you approach putting all this together? I mean, clearly you've written legislature, and you've pursued that, but.
Great question. So, I had written legal briefs, which I like to think they're in art form, but obviously it's a totally different style. I was a paid op-ed columnist for the LA Times when I left office, and they made me a much better writer. My gosh, their editors are so good that they trained me to convey a whole lot of information in a short bit. But writing a book was really hard. It was hard to organize it and hard to try to, put it all together. But, I want to take a stab at it for those reasons. And I appreciate all feedback. If anybody reads it and tells me they love it, tell me they hate it, I appreciate all feedback.
So what I'm aware of, Shiloh actually was able to completely consume the book this week. I've only been able to dive into some of the details. Some what you mentioned earlier was this happened in November of 2013. One of the things that Shiloh was quick to point out when we were discussing it this week is that it was the only murder in Silver Lake that year. Are you comfortable sharing with us what some of the early theories or the early leads and theories at that time, what were they?
Great question, because this has been something that has been kind of frustrating, but I'll sort of take the viewer through these weird early days. So the first piece that the media jumped on was that this was a murder over Russian icons. There's a style of painting, they're Byzantine or Russian icons. They're painted on wood with paint and then gold and silver leafed over them. And some of them are quite valuable, just like any other art pieces and paintings. My father had an extensive collection of them. And I want to say that like the day after he was murdered or 2 days after he was scheduled, they had some local group, had advertised like the Friends of the Library or something advertised like Joe Gatto is going to appear at this talk on medieval Byzantine and Russian art at the library. And he's going to bring some samples of his extensive, valuable collection of, these paintings. And so I don't remember if a neighbor gave that flyer to the media or something, but initially everybody made it sound like, gee, this was like a Russian thing, or like I won't say a Russian thing, but that somebody had thought that he might have had the paintings in storage. He had them at his house. And so they tried to time it to get that. Now, of course, like to us, that was, I won't say laughable, but right as you walked into my father's house, there's the sort of subterranean level, there's level 2 and level 3. As you walk up to where my father was killed, there's a big, Russian icon hanging on the wall, right? And it wasn't taken.
Just so right there.
Yeah. So we sort of knew that this was not legitimate theory. Also, my father's collection was not that valuable. I mean, I suppose people have no way of knowing that, but it's not like he had like the Mona Lisa of Russian icons.
It's a great screenplay, but
yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the value that we attach to specific types of artwork like that is relative. Like, yes, it's worth this amount of money, but for someone who thinks they're going to steal it and fence it, that's right. Pretty improbable. Yeah.
Right. You can't walk into a pawn shop and sell these Russian paintings, right? The second theory that came out a few days later, and that came out over, I want to say like an early version of group chats or like email chains, was a theory that to this day, the police give some merit to. But during those early days, they thought this was the whole case. So Silver Lake, as most people know, is shaped like a bowl. You have to picture it like a stadium. And the bottom is the reservoir. That's like the field of play. And then it has these streets that kind of, are like the aisles and the seats of a stadium. And so there's sort of like 2 or 3 ring seats. And then my dad's street, with only 3 houses, was like an aisle. So on the street, on the same night, there was a lady coming home with her son from karate. And they were driving down the street right at dusk, and they saw a guy breaking into cars. And they fetched a neighbor and said, hey, the guy's breaking into cars. And they kind of gave chase, or they kind of, said, hey, stop. It's all so unclear because they don't remember much from that one moment in time. I interviewed them to learn this, by the way, and this is what I relay in the book. But They said, first of all, the guy backed towards the community. There's a walk staircase, community stairs. And he backed toward this staircase that connects the different levels. And he said something like, stay away from me unless you want to die tonight. Or do you want to die tonight? That's what one of the witnesses remembers, the man. But despite saying that, they chased him. They drove their car around to meet him where he was at the bottom. And the boy, he's a young boy at the time, the boy told police that he was pretty sure that the guy had a gun, pretty sure that he pointed a gun at them. So the police detectives, they said things to me like, well, when you see a horse running through the neighborhood, you don't go looking for no unicorns. Okay, yeah, Occam's razor, great. But this quickly, because of the publicity of it, it became the dominant theory that there was a neighborhood kid, perhaps high on drugs, perhaps breaking into cars to get his next fix, who was breaking into cars right as people came home from work, and carrying a gun to do it rather than just, holding up one of the people who's jogging around the lake or, selling the gun for drugs, whatever, that this guy was breaking into cars with a gun and he somehow ran into my dad's house and killed him. For this theory to work, the police have confirmed that a tour helicopter was flying to the Hollywood sign at right about the same time. And their theory is that he heard the helicopter. He thought that the police had been called. And right at that moment in time, my dad had bought a printer that day at Costco. My dad had apparently, again, this is the police's theory, he had taken the printer out of his hatchback and he pressed the button to close his garage door. And the guy happened to be on my dad's street right at that time and darted in the garage door. And again, for this theory to work, let me tell you the rest, that this kid sat in my dad's garage for an hour. And rather than just pushing the button and leaving, at some point decided to go up to the third floor of a house he knows is occupied with 3 cars. My dad had 3 cars, walk up to the third floor of my dad's bedroom and just shoot him, right? And on top of that, stay there while my dad bleeds to death to try to look for a few belongings. To me, that theory has always been crazy, but this was the dominant theory for years.
Wow. That's a lot to digest. I mean, in the book, you realize how much wasn't done, I guess, in the investigation, right? The little things that even you just thought up of that could be followed up on. And I know I read it, but now to hear it again, I'm like, wow, but that's a lot of digging to look at, like when tour helicopters were flying over. Like, it's so fascinating to me, kind of the juxtaposition of the things that really were looked into and the things that weren't. But yeah, that had to be incredibly frustrating to try and swallow that pill, I guess, that they were feeding you.
Yeah. It just struck me as weird, right? Because, and this is why I'm so excited to be on this show.
Yeah.
You guys are accomplished psychologists and you know how weird it is to like accept certain of these things. And yeah, I suppose if he was on drugs, it all is explainable, but someone's breaking into cars because everyone's coming home. That's kind of a weird thing to do. It's kind of brazen or stupid. But then when he's confronted, rather than just blowing the lady away, he runs away. Well, I'm getting out of here, and he runs away. And then all these coincidences happened. I mean, the police are like, well, maybe he was right-handed and that makes people turn right when they flee. And then he thought your dad's street was an alley. And so he ran down that. And then he was crouching and then, all these coincidences. But then he goes into my dad's house and does all these really stupid things, right? But has never been caught, has never reoffended, has never been caught.
Yep.
It's like, well, he's either really brazen and really careless and really bizarre and he's really stupid, or he's brilliant and he's this master cover up of his acts. It just never made sense to me.
Yeah. I totally get like a kid dipping into an opportunistic garage and hunkering down for a couple hours and then going back out underneath the garage that wasn't closed fully and scurrying off until the night after it's dark. I could buy that up until your dad's actual murder, like what? Yeah.
That part, it doesn't follow a regular chronology. And also the way you were describing it, just an opportunistic individual that then doesn't follow through with the opportunity that they created by taking someone's life and then taking anything else. Was there any predominant evidence at the scene of the crime that was significant?
Yeah, there's so much that's fascinating, right? So first of all, my dad's garage was filled with valuables. My dad made jewelry. He had very expensive tools. He had gold. He had, like cars that I think he left the keys in his cars in the garage. I mean, like this kid could have just been down there and like walked out with whatever he wanted from the garage. Okay. The other thing that is also weird, right? And then I'll talk about the evidence. The other thing that I didn't mention that also is so weird is very few people have done this. We're all respectable people. But if you ever go to a shooting range and you fire a gun, you realize how loud they are. Any gun is really, really loud. And then you
even with a silencer.
Yes, yeah. And obviously very few people have silencers, mostly in the movies. And then you imagine firing a gun in an enclosed area and sitting there while someone is burbling and begging and dying and bleeding to death and calmly rifling through some things. And like, that's like a psychopath, or I don't know what the word would be, but it's just so weird. Most people, if a gun goes off, it's like, someone heard it, right?
Yeah.
And I like to think even hardened criminals have a hard time sitting next to a corpse or somebody who's dying. I don't know. But anyway, the thing this is what was weird. My dad had a 3-story house filled with valuables. There were iPads and paintings and tools and things like this. The only things that were taken or broken into, he had a wooden file cabinet that he kept papers in. The wooden file cabinet was hacked open, and far as we know, something was taken. They had left some watches in it. They had left some jewelry in it, but something was taken from that file cabinet. To this day, we don't know what it was. Wooden file cabinet hacked open.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. There were some of his jewelry, lesser valuable stuff that he was making, had apparently been taken. There were some envelopes, little tiny jewelry envelopes that had been rifled through, left on his bed and taken. So the criminal did spend some time in his bedroom alone. Somebody had made a big show, and I still think this was a show because I can't imagine even the dumbest, highest criminal being this stupid. Somebody had gone down into my dad's backyard, gotten one of those shears that you clip roses with, and tried to break into like a Wells Fargo Old West safe with those scissors.
Oh, come on.
Again, you got to like imagine this is one of those like thick safes that you see in an old Western movie with like walls this thick, right?
Yeah.
And somebody had taken these basically oversized scissors and like tried to break into the safe like that, which is like, I mean, again, it makes sense if you have an IQ of 80 and you're really high.
Right.
But to me, it seemed staged almost, or like whatever. But anyway, in the entire 3-story house and the garage, as far as we know, there were a few bucks taken from my dad's wallet. There was the file cabinet that was hacked into. There's a few pieces of jewelry that were rifled through and likely taken. By the way, nothing has shown up for sale as far as we know so far. And that's it. And that is, again, one of the mysteries of my dad's case.
I mean, to me, it speaks more of someone who was there before your dad and kind of had the luxury of time to do some of this. And I know you do talk about like the things that kind of fit that and the things that kind of don't as well in the book, but you're right. And I think if, Scott and I were to look at this and kind of try and hypothesize any psychological profile behind it, I mean, psychopathy, I mean, the whole hallmark of that is somebody without empathy, right? That they're going to sit there and be able to be calm while somebody is dying that they had just killed. But they're also probably going to have wits about them to be like, someone probably heard that, I need to get out of here, right? The calmness helps them think through, like the cognitive piece, where someone else would be incredibly frazzled and not making good decisions. So interesting. Any more thoughts on that, Scott? Did you want to add?
Yeah,
before we move on.
As with any horrific situation like this, that from the elements you've described, when drugs are in the mix, the world is very different over the past 25 years in terms of drug-related crimes because the use of meth, and being incredibly addictive and also cognitively impairing people, reducing any kind of brakes on impulsivity. There are some wacky things that happened. And I mean, look, I know so little about this case, but I immediately thought trying to get into a old time Wells Fargo safe with a pair of garden shears is absolutely the kind of thing that a tweaker would do.
Very methy.
But it's very methy, but it also doesn't add up to other things because just because somebody would be impulsive in that way, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to notice some things that were clearly valuable.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm fascinated, things pop out for me. And again, I know nothing about this. I'm fascinated by the fact that they went after that old wooden cabinet.
Yeah.
To me, that has meaning.
And I can tell you something that was most fascinating. After we drove down and the police took me on a tour of the crime scene, like literally like where you would have had to be to walk to actually get at my dad. He wore big jewelry. He just wore big jewelry. And he had this big gold ring and it was sitting right there and nobody. So like you would think that like the meth head would take that and like take the iPad that was sitting on his desk and like all these other things. But it's just so weird. It's just so weird. Like, or at least like,
that goes to your staging theory. That actually goes to your staging. It's like, if you're not going to take something that's clearly right there, then
it's just weird behavior.
It is. It almost makes you think of someone who I guess ultimately like knew him and had seen some of that stuff before, because they kind of almost don't see it, right? Like they've seen it before, they kind of glaze over it. They had knowledge of it, so it doesn't stick out to them as a shiny object like it would to someone who is going in randomly. But one of the early moments in the book that I think was really impactful is when you are describing this intersection of being the adult son of a murder victim, working as an assemblyman, a high-profile individual, and then having detectives that are assigned to your case question or give you pause, I guess I should say, on how you voted on something, hypothesizing that your father's death was could have been a result of that. I mean, it was just such
that's a stretch.
Shitty thing for me to read and for them to do. I mean, but can you talk a little bit about like, what was that like? I mean, obviously we know it wasn't a peak in this whole investigation, but why did you want to include little nuggets like that in the book? Because, obviously I'm a former police officer. Scott and I both worked with law enforcement. Law enforcement is incredibly glorified and a lot of content, but that's not always the case. And so I'm curious why, and you have glowing things to say about the detectives who have the case now. I want to balance that out, but why did you think this was important for the public to know?
Yeah, so part of it is I did want to give that honest window and what it's like to be a lawmaker. A quick anecdote that I'll tell is when you're a lawmaker, people always, when they have your attention, even for 5 minutes, they want to take their shot and make their lobby pitch about their own personal axe to grind. When my second daughter was born, we're at the hospital and we're going there and my wife is in labor and the anesthesiologist is like, hey, you're Assemblyman Mike Gatto. How are you going to vote on this bill, blah, blah, blah. There's this bill coming up before you and let me tell you what it does, blah, blah, blah. And my wife is like, hello, I need the epidural, right? And like, so this type of stuff happened all the time, right?
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
All the time. But I, had not slept for like 36 hours. We had driven down with like, 2 small kids, taken a tour of the crime scene. I'm horribly emotional. I think I literally had tears streaming down my face. I'm sitting and talking with the police and they're like, well, we think this might have been an AB 109er. I'm like, okay, so AB 109 is this bill where basically we realign the justice system. We took people who would be sent to state prison under the theory that state prison turns people into hardened criminals, and we put them into the local county jails. It works in smaller counties, right? If you're the son of an unemployed mill worker in Humboldt, being close to your family versus being in state prison is a good thing. But in LA County, it was a miserable failure, right? I had voted yes on that bill, and the police just used this opportunity to scold me, to say that my dad's killer could have been an AB 109er and all this stuff, and I just thought, I put that in also because I thought it was horribly unprofessional.
Absolutely.
As luck would have it, Los Angeles is really a small community. My second cousin had also dated one of the detective's sisters back in high school. And he also would just rail at me because of that. And it was like, hey, dude, like, I wasn't there. I'm not my cousin,
wow.
It was just so strange. And, by the way, that same detective later had a huge scandal with the LAPD and is no longer with the LAPD.
Big surprise.
So, yeah.
Right. That tracks. Let me just say that tracks.
Yeah.
So again, kind of circling back to where we started today, it's just such an inconceivable position to be put in. Given what you know now, what would have been helpful for you to have in the immediate time after getting this information, as you're going through the crime scene, what would have helped you? What would you have liked?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And I can answer it probably 5 different ways. So nothing prepares you for that mentally or emotionally. I had a pretty darn good support network. But at the same time, everything that you hear is true. with the first month is a whirlwind of activities, and there's the condolence calls and all the cards and the flowers and stuff. But at some point you are left alone with your grief. And I don't know, maybe talking with a counselor would have probably been beneficial. I didn't do that. In terms of like real tools, it's amazing to think this because, to me, 2013 feels like yesterday, but 2013 was before the advent of Ring cameras. I mean, if this was like any other time in any other middle-class neighborhood in America, there'd be Ring camera footage of exactly who did it, unless somebody did something really fancy to plan the crime, right? And the cops were amazed. They're like, Silver Lake has no security cameras, I think doorbell cameras were just a thing. And I tried to explain to them the culture. I'm like, well, it's a very free-spirited, lefty community, and like they don't like Big Brother and stuff like that. But
right.
Like, there's not a single surveillance camera. Nobody has anything. I was like, oh, geez, that would have helped. DNA technology has improved tremendously. Having that would have helped. But I'll tell you the thing that I think would have helped the most would have been humility by the detectives. Just humility. Okay. Because I interviewed a whole bunch of people. There was one lady who lived maybe 500 feet from my dad. She is 1,000% sure she heard a gunshot at a different period than the mainstream timeline. And it's like, why do I have to cover this? Like, why?
Yeah.
And it's like, and this is also the point that I make in the book about other murder victims, right? I was a very high profile lawmaker. In many ways, I funded the police departments of major cities as chair of appropriations. And the level of customer service that I got was so horrible. And I say this in the book. And then you think about like the Grim Sleeper case, where here's a guy who like killed in this like 10-block radius in South LA over decades. And they just treated it like, man, it's another dead prostitute in South LA. Yeah. And that's the point that I make is if I got treated like this, if this high profile case was whatever, how must it feel to be somebody who has no connections? And that point I think is super important for readers.
Yeah, certainly. And you have been able to connect with some of those victims over the years, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just for our listeners today too, I'll give you just a brief story. When I first started in this career at the master's level, I was, halfway through a master's program and I got dumped into doing some counseling that I was not ready for at all. I was at a great training center, but we often got cases that were way beyond our experience level. And I was not aware. I actually was assigned a client, a young woman who had witnessed, she was not a direct victim of a crime, but witnessed something absolutely horrific. And her counseling at our center was funded by a state victims advocacy board. And it led me down this rabbit hole. I had no idea that anything like that existed. And so for anyone that's out there listening to this today or listening, in the years coming up, as long as this media is up, please know that there are, we'll post it today, but there are scads and scads of organizations that are out there and can help you and can help your family or help your loved ones navigate through this process. And if you're on the lower end of the income spectrum, like there are incredible resources there that can get you counseling and support. And again, like Mike, you could have been in the position where, like you're saying, during that first month where you're absolutely out of your body, you're experiencing long-term shock when something like this happens. Is many times when we're in that position, people can be right there in front of us, giving us all the resources that we need, and we can't hear it. We literally can't take it in because we're so overwhelmed with everything that's happened. So that's a normal part of the process. It's an unpleasant part of the process, but anybody out there listening, please know there are organizations, and we'll post those as well. And I just appreciate your advocacy. On behalf of somebody who's worked in law enforcement, co-responder teams, I had the opportunity to work with some of the most wonderfully compassionate and passionate about their jobs individuals across a political spectrum. But at the end of the day, we're all there to do our job and our job together, and the rest of the stuff needs to be pushed aside. And I've also seen the other side of it as well, like you've shared. And I'm just so sorry that you had to go through it and your family had to go through that. We all deserve better, and people can do better.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to complain. As Dr. Shiloh said, I really appreciate many of the team that's worked on my dad's case. There's a terrific team now. There was a terrific team in the first 24 hours. It's just sometimes victims do not feel like they're listened to or that their case is prioritized. And
absolutely.
I wanted people to understand that.
And you doing the work that you did on your dad's case, it just doesn't, how can you wrap your head around, detectives are very busy, and here you are helping with the free time that you have that they don't have to say, here's something I've worked on. Maybe it's a thing, maybe it isn't. And I think that, any one of us would be like, oh my God, that's amazing. Thank you for helping me do part of my job. And, certainly that's not the sentiment. And we hear that time and time again, of course, through a lot of crime stories. Is there still a reward? Also, are there any sort of investigatory techniques, maybe helped by technology, that could be revisited? Just thinking, kind of in today's day and age, I don't think you mentioned today any possibility or state of DNA. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there is still a reward. The reward is the standard reward that's set by the city of Los Angeles. I talk in the book about how I tried to augment it, but the police told me, and I quickly realized the wisdom of their position, that we cannot send a message that any life is worth another. So even if I were to privately go out there and raise money to give to an additional reward, they have to all be the same. There is still a reward for information to solve my dad's case. And I'd love it if people picked up my book and really did try to think about who could have done it and maybe why. And especially people from Los Angeles, if you know something or somebody acted weird that day, that would be wonderful. We do have DNA. We also have partial palm prints and things like that. But there is very limited, there was DNA on the garden shears, right? But we don't know if that was from my dad's gardener or from the people he bought it from at a garage sale or something like this. The police have a pretty good sense that it was from the perpetrator or was from somebody in the room at the time, but you can't be sure, right? The problem is that it's not like blood or, obviously not semen or anything like that. It is what's called epithelial touch DNA, right? It's literally a sweat drop with a few skin cells that is rubbed off on a surface. The amount is so small. It is so small. I mean, the human mind cannot fathom how tiny the amount is. And my understanding is you have to put half aside for the defense to use to do their own tests when somebody's finally arrested. Then you get the half of the sample and you have got to decide, do you send a few microns to this lab and a few microns to that lab? Some of it had to be uploaded to the FBI's nationwide system, CODIS. Some of it had to be used to access familial DNA in the state.
Okay.
We've had no hits.
Okay.
Genealogical DNA was really a thing for a while, but then everybody pulled back. All of the companies pulled back, and 23andMe is bankrupt, and so it's very hard.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is that different police departments have vastly different policies, right? Sometimes I'll be, reading the news and I'll be like, wow, the Podunk, North Carolina police welcomed this Grandma Smith from Arkansas who read about a case and did all the DNA sleuthing and solved the case for them. That's not the LAPD. They're like, we can't release any information about it. It's like, well, even a cold case, it's like, but what's amazing to me, and I went down this rabbit hole of DNA, is that there are people who take their DNA samples and upload it to the web. And it's usually people with a unique last name. Like my last name is McNamara or McCardle or something. And I want to test if everybody else who has that last name in the world is descended from the same male. And so they'll convince people from all over Ireland, all of the United States, whatever, to get that test. And then they upload what are called Y chromosome STRs, right? And, if you actually hit one of these surname projects, you can actually find the last name of the person who committed the crime, which is kind of like, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
But I just don't sense that there's an embrace of this, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't sense that there's like a scientific curiosity or a humility with the average detective, but things are getting better. And, the FBI is involved in my dad's case as well. So I have hope that someday we will know something.
Yeah, certainly it will probably be through one of those means. There are so many interesting experiences. I can't say that enough to people who are thinking about picking up this book that you lay out in there. I mean, just psychologically, it's so fascinating. The tipsters that you talk to, I mean, that, Scott and I have each worked with a handful of delusional clients. And at the beginning, you don't know they're delusional because it's not a bizarre delusion. It's a delusion that could be true.
And they want to help.
Yeah.
and they want to help and they're really, interested and really believable. And through your writing to hear like when it clicks for you that like, oh my gosh, really? Like I made time to talk to this person. And what that process was like was very interesting. I think also the tidbits about you sort of being tagged to speak on gun control, just looking at what the media's like attention span is with cases like this. I'm telling you guys, like I know this book looks smaller than it can be to fit all of this information, but that's the beauty of it. You have this story that unfolds in what feels like you're walking along with Mike during it, but you're getting these other little chunks of all these really interesting pieces that we don't really hear about with what victims go through. So we could definitely go on forever. Scott and I usually close with some rapid fire questions. And I know we didn't tell you about this from the beginning. So
we don't want you to prepare. This will be a little bit of a palate cleanser. So real
And
quick.
tell me we have like 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, because I'll be appropriately short.
just we're at the end, however long this takes, it's fine.
So your favorite LA restaurant and your dish at that restaurant.
Oh gosh, great question. So there's a restaurant called Curaçao. It is the only Sardinian island that's part of Italy. It's the only Sardinian restaurant I'm aware of on like the West Coast. They have a pasta dish called Malu Redus that are so unique. It's like everything good about Italian food with a Sardinian twist. Curaçao in Culver City, great place.
Culver City.
Oh, good to know. My husband's going to flip over that. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, what about your favorite film that takes place in LA?
Ooh, favorite film that takes place. So one of the quirks I mentioned in the book is my dad raised me without popular culture. So
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
That's right.
I have not seen Star Wars to this day, just for
wow.
So
Mike.
favorite film that takes place in LA, I'll go with LA Confidential because it's
and I wonder why that would be on the top of your mind. I don't know.
Okay. So favorite color.
Favorite color, I like purple, white, and black. I like the mix of them. I like the juxtaposition of them.
Nice.
Oh, nice. Royalty. Good. There you go.
Okay, this one's going to be a multiple choice, so feel free to mull this over as long as it takes. What is your favorite baseball team? Is it A, the Dodgers, B, the Angels, C, some other team, or D, some other wrong answer that is not the Dodgers?
My dad worked at Dodger Stadium when I was a kid. He sold peanuts. It was 2 of his 3 jobs. I grew up watching all 162 Dodger games every season, was a mad fan.
Oh my gosh.
At some point during their tough years, they lost me. It was very painful. I've come back now to the Dodgers. My favorite team is my son's Little League team. They just finished in first place. They have a playoff game on Tuesday, and we're all so excited about it.
Aww.
What are they called?
What's
the name of their team?
They're the Lunada Bay Miners Padres.
Oh, fantastic.
My boy is 7 and he's
Congratulations.
playing with 11-year-olds, so I'm so proud too.
Oh,
yeah,
fantastic.
That made me fall in love with your dad. And you're like, he taught all day long, and then he went and sold peanuts at Dodger Stadium. And I was just like, this guy,
awesome.
What a man. Yeah. Okay,
So,
one more, Scott.
Final question. What book for you, especially since you were not raised on popular culture, book in your life sticks out as the most influential thing that you've ever read?
Gosh, that's a fascinating question. I mean,
I know. Look at that library.
Right?
I love the Lyndon Johnson books by Robert Caro. There's 4 of them. I want to say the middle 2 are some of the best writing. It's historical writing, but it's so amazing to hear what motivated young Lyndon Johnson as a Congress member during the Great Depression. Fascinating stuff. Must read.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Well, look, we have had the opportunity over the past few years to have amazing guests on, all of them unique in their way. You've completely raised the bar for us. Thank you so much for giving us your time on a holiday weekend. I am very hopeful that something will come out of this getting to a wider audience. What this will be released on our regular feed. I'm sure it will be discussed at length on our Discord channel. And I would now want to go and see if anybody's posting about it on Reddit as well. So again, thank you for your time. Everyone, please head over to your local favorite online bookstore and purchase Mike Gatto's book, Noir By Necessity, a quick but dense and fantastic read. And again, Mike, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Stick around for a second. For everyone else, thank you guys for being here. Our next guests coming up are going to be Kate Schweit, retired FBI, with her new book, Women Who Talk to the Dead. Of course, we've done a lot of overlap with Kate and Sarah of Stop the Killing podcast. And then we will later in the summer be talking to a Detective Mike Weber, who specializes in Munchausen by proxy investigations. So his book is The Mother Next Door. So we got a lineup for you guys. If you guys want to grab those books, we'll put those in the show notes as well if you want to get started on them. But thank you so much for being here, everyone, including you, Dr. Mike. We will see you guys next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Take care, guys.
Bye, folks.
Bye. We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of Alienist Entertainment and the Crawlspace Media Network. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
Our theme music, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons attribution license. Please check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at www.la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram at LA Not So Podcast. On TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, we are at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Once a month, we go live on YouTube on a Saturday afternoon. So stay tuned to our social media announcements to join our interactive broadcast entitled Behind the Couch, where we interview guests on a number of psych, criminal justice, and true crime topics.
And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, additional content, host interaction, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool merch.
So thanks for listening, and join us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.